the first property, the first settlement. We're going to fast forward. Raise your hand if you don't know who William Hamilton Merritt is. Niagara's leading white abolitionist. So he's also considered the father of transportation. He was an entrepreneur and he was a businessman. He was also a member of Parliament and he was a member of St. George's Church. So 1824 they decide they're going to build the Welland Canal, and that's because the Erie Canal was coming up, but there was something in the way for transportation. Two things actually. The Niagara River, Niagara Falls, and of course going over the escarpment when you're picking up your canoe or trying to navigate with a carriage, you can't do it. So William Hamilton Merritt and his business partner Oliver Phelps decided that they're going to construct the Welland Canal. The black community was over by the Pierpoint property. They relocated them here to Geneva Street, North Street, which was the Broadway of the area, as well as Welland Avenue. That's how we came here. So according to John Jackson and Sheila Wilson's in their book, St. Catharines, the Welland Canal City, the church restarted to be constructed in 1835. But at the time, we were still an African Methodist Episcopal Society. By 1837, the faithful here sent a petition to the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the United States, the Mother Church, Philadelphia, and asked for us to be received, installed into the New York State Conference. That was granted in 1838, and we became the first AME church in Canada, so British North America. We're going to fast forward. I'm going to answer that question that you had mentioned. So we finished August 1st, 1834. No questions about that. That's how come we have Emancipation Day. So the first act, fast forwarding to 1850 now, the second Fugitive Slave Act in the United States. Anybody familiar with that? So, yes. So the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act meant any black person living in the northern states, whether they were free, they had their manumission papers, so freeborn, or if they were runaways, could be captured or kidnapped under the fugitive slave law and sent into slavery. So for example, you could be 4 generations freeborn, and if you were accused of being a runaway, you were sent into slavery for the first time. That's the Solomon Northup story, 12 years a slave. Yes, yes. So what happened was that law upset a lot of white people in the northern states. They were living freely in the north. They could turn a blind eye to enslavement because it wasn't next door to them. They weren't witnessing people being abused or oppressed. But now with this new law, which stated that they had to assist law enforcement. So if somebody was accused and there was only, one U.S. Marshal, and the U.S. Marshal said, "You, come and help me," now you have to help the Marshal apprehend this individual. What if he was your neighbor for 20 years? Well, you could have been living side by side. And if you didn't help the Marshal, you could be fined or you could be imprisoned. So what that did is it woke up white people, and the woke word, and turned them into anti-slavery activists or anti-slavery sympathizers. Many became staunch abolitionists because they did not like that law. What else that meant is now, because of miscegenation that started to occur immediately, so from 1619 all the way up to 1850, it was called the bleach out. So you have a piece of pie. Enslavers, in order to increase the slave population, they would either have forced unions with themselves and a woman who was enslaved, or they would make the forced unions. So the number one dynamic of slavery was the separation of families. You could do that whenever you wanted to. Number 2, the procreation with the enslaved female. Number 3, the taskmaster's whip. So you have a pie, you cut the pie in half, it's now biracial. You keep cutting that pie in half with white people, and by the time you get to the 64th slice of pie, which was the 1-drop rule, 1 drop of black blood, you were still considered enslaved. Best way to view it is the story of William and Ellen Craft, and you can Google that. William was dark complected, Ellen was extremely light. They said that she had green eyes and poker straight hair, so brown hair. She disguised herself as a man, tied her hair up, put gauze around her face, pretend she had a toothache, and put her arm in a sling. And they escaped to the north was her servant. You can Google them because there's many sketches of them. As long as she couldn't speak, right, because that would be the enslaved dialect, right, Ebonics, and she couldn't write, as long as she pretended that, then they were both safe. So that's how it worked. So, northern people did not like that. So they were screaming about it, especially Quakers. They were the first to start screaming about the bleach out back in around 1670. So now it's up to 1850. They see what is happening because enslavers are pretty much in control of Congress, and Northerners are just decided, hey, wait a second. If you can kidnap and accuse that individual, and you can kidnap and accuse people who look like Ellen Craft, what about the rest of us? Yeah. So you'll see that. You can fact check it in real time. The term that they called poor white laborers who they wanted to enslave were mudsills. So you can fact check that, because when Breckenridge was up here in the late 1850s, that's what he was accused them of being, nothing but mudsills. So poor white laborers, especially the Irish, they wanted to enslave them as well. So that's one of the forgotten causes of the Civil War, and Professor Lawrence Tanzer wrote a book about that in 1998. You can fact check that as well. So now it's the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law. Thousands of people of African descent are starting to cross the border, whether it be the Detroit or Niagara River, because free blacks want to secure their safety and freedoms, and those who are fugitives, they want to secure their safety and freedom as well. So now many arrive here in St. Catharines. The church is too small. The second one only housed 70 people, so they decide that they're going to build this larger church. So fundraising started for it in October 1851. Construction began in 1853, and then the doors opened November 4th, 1855. And it was still an African Methodist Episcopal church. So the title of it was Bethel Chapel. Any questions so far? Yes.
What's the bleach out?
Bleach out means when you have a parent who's black and a parent who's white, and then you have a child who's biracially mixed. Because the child can't be pure white or the child can't be pure black. But when they called it bleach out, that was like a slang name for it from years and years ago. We don't say that now. We say biracial. Yeah.
Are there any estimates as to how many slaves would have drowned crossing Niagara River?
No. I've never heard an estimate about that.
Must be hundreds.
Most likely.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned relationship between slaves. Were they families that were having, like, say, mother and son were having children?
Mother and son having? No.
Was that something that was going on?
Well, if a slave master forced it, yeah.
Okay.
Like slave, we all know slave masters forced homosexuality just for pure entertainment.
Right. So that was something that was going on.
Yeah. Like, if it wouldn't have occurred naturally, but if the enslaver said, this is what you're doing it.
Appropriate so they can have more slaves.
Yeah.
And that was still, was that happening after the Fugitive Act? Well, like when slavery was supposed to eventually abolish, but
Oh, are you talking in the United States?
no, like here in Canada.
Okay, because there's only, I won't name the names, but there's only 2 accused of that here. Because there's research is still ongoing about it. Well, one is Gray, so I'll tell you that one. I won't give up the second one, because he's extremely prominent. But,
Is he still alive?
no, they're all dead. No. No, prominent figure, historical figure. Yeah, here, British North America, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
What does biracial mean?
So a mixed marriage. Yeah, mixed marriage. So if an Asian marries somebody who's black, they're biracial, or what else? A black person marries someone who's white, then it's biracial. Interracial marriages. So it's not interracial when it's 2 of the same that marry. When they're different, then it's interracial. Did you have a question?
I was going to comment when you mentioned the 2 homosexuals and how it was forced. That's the term about came about.
Okay. Yeah.
That's how that term went down.
Yeah, for sure. The Bethel Chapel. So the mother church is Bethel Chapel in Philadelphia. So it's the mother church of all the African Methodist Episcopal churches. When we became the first in Canada, so we're going back to 1838, we were called Bethel Chapel. So we were the first up until 1856. So the doors open here November 4th, 1855. 1 year later, we severed our ties with the U.S. We became African, we became British Methodist Episcopal. And that's because nobody was willing to go back to the U.S., especially the clergy, under the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, because they could be captured and sent into slavery. So we became British Methodist Episcopal Church, but still Bethel Chapel. The name Bethel did not change until 1955. We became Salem Chapel when we rededicated the church. Any questions about the BME AME? Okay, so who's our most famous member? Yeah, for sure. And many people think many things about Tubman. Here's her picture, but visualize her. 5 feet tall, roughly 100 pounds. Miss Fitness, a cross between Miss Fitness America, a bodybuilder, you name it. In her narrative, when she's about 18 years old, even though she was struck in the head and she had a head injury, so she was suffering from a head injury her entire life. She had a gnawing headache that persisted from the time she was 12 or 13 all the way until she passed in 1913, so in her 90s. She said in her narrative that her enslaver would exploit her. So you know what a flour barrel is, right? Not the huge, large wine barrels, but the smaller ones that they would put flour in. They would make her pick that up and tote it, carry it around just to entertain his friends. Look at how strong she is. So this little tiny woman who suffered from what they called back then sleeping spells. So today we know it as temporal lobe syndrome. She suffered from seizures, so at any given time she'd black out. There's an account of her coming into the church here because she was a songstress. She'd always sing in alto voice that she would black out and fall asleep and then wake up. What are your main questions about Tubman? So, and for me, I'm looking at Tubman through the only lens I can, as a freedom seeker descendant and as a black woman.
How old was she when she arrived here?
We don't know.
We don't.
Why? Because she was human property. And if keeping a documentation like that was no more important. So Tubman said in 2 Civil War depositions she was born in 1825. Her contemporaries said she was born between 1820 and 1821. Scholars today believe that she was born in 1822. And that's because in a ledger there's an account of her mother giving birth. So the enslaver's paying $2 to a midwife in March 1822 for writ to have a child. So in the United States, they are celebrating this as the Harriet Tubman Bicentennial, 1822. We buy into it as well, but it's circa. Because if we stand here and say, and affirm when she was born, then what are we doing to our ancestral history? We're calling it a lie. If she's saying 1825, who am I to say she's lying? You know? So you'll see, her birth date around here, everything says circa.
What did you think about the movie, the film Harriet Tubman? It certainly wasn't accurate.
Yeah. So with Focus Features films, we're not supposed to say it publicly, so we can't spread it and write it down. It was a lie, and it was revisionist history. And what sickened me about it, because we went to TIFF to see it, we were invited, of course, because this church is the Canadian Foundation, and then we had to host the event at the theater. Everybody that is 30 and under, that really doesn't care about history, or is up and coming and learning about this history, now thinks that black bounty hunters were capturing runaway slaves. Absolutely not. When you look at the American anti-slavery tracts between 1831 and 1861, because they documented the slave catchers throughout the South, not one was a person of African descent. But can't blame white folks for that. The producer was black, the director was black, and the script writer was black. So that, of course, and not just, I'm not saying it sickened me, the majority, it was, just put it this way, the movie was an epic flop for blacks in Canada and the US. Yeah, it was an epic flop. Then it had the undertones of lesbianism, which nobody knew that about Harriet Tubman. And then the love story about with the white enslaver. Yeah, so really weird.
When she was the first female to acquire a pension, that's what I remember.
Say that again? Yes, yes. She received the Civil War pension from her husband, Nelson Davis. And then she received hers later on. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? What was the motive behind the directors? Nobody knows. It was just an epic flop, and me personally, I hope they never work again. So far they have.